Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by Agenda. Learn more at www.agenda.com.
Surprising results, often in a good way. Like, one of the things that took me aback when I first used this technology was that, when we're playing our tabletop role-playing game, we'll often be saying things like, my character says blah, 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 blah. And what I was surprised by was in the transcript, it would say, my character says, open quotes, yada, 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 close quotes. I'm like, it's picked up that that's a quotation. How did that surprises me.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. I'm excited to welcome back Canis to the podcast, who has been on episodes 34 and 160 of the show to talk about Ferrite versions 2 and 3. In this episode, we are diving deep into his latest app, Transcriptionist, an on-device transcription app that directly integrates with Ferrite. This is an app that really puts the power of the M1 and M2 iPad Pros to use and creates some truly great-looking and very accurate transcripts. So we'll be diving into that app in depth coming up. If you want to support this podcast, the best thing to do is go out and download Agenda, who is sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. I'll be sharing a bit later in this episode all about their Agenda 18 update. But for now, head on over to agenda.com and get started with this awesome app that I've used for years at this point to produce the show. Another way to support this podcast and get early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros is by supporting the Patreon at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. My great thanks to everyone that supports the show there. And as a reminder, I now do a podcast all about the Apple Vision Pro, which you can find at visionpros.fm and on all the various podcast platforms. The October episode is now out with Bart Buchatz. This was such a fun discussion about the potential of this spatial computing future, and now Apple has been laying this foundation for years at this point. So go out and listen to that if you haven't had a chance to yet. With that, here's my discussion with Canis, all about Transcriptionist. Welcome back to the podcast, Canis.
Hi, Tim, and thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. So we are not talking about Ferrite today, although it is related very much so, as this is a new app, Transcriptionist, all about transcribing audio, and it directly integrates with Ferrite if you are a Ferrite user, but works as a standalone app if not. So for those that don't know who you are and haven't listened to the past episodes, can you share a bit about your background as a developer?
Hi, I'm Canis, and I've been making apps for iOS since the day the App Store opened. Well, I guess I started making them a little bit in advance, but the day the App Store opened, I had an app on sale, and I haven't stopped since. Before that, I actually worked in the video games industry. I spent about 10 years doing that. So that was my early background. And on the App Store, I've been making mostly audio-related apps. Not entirely. I've dabbled with other stuff, but a lot of the more successful apps have been audio-related, including music synthesizers, audio editors, and I think these days most well-known for Ferrite, as you mentioned, which is the podcast editor.
Excellent. And before we dive into this brand new app, I'm curious, iPadOS 17, has it changed much in how you use your iPad? And I know interactive widgets are still kind of rolling out, but
it hasn't really. I mean, I think it's a solid update. There's a lot of really nice features. They're just not ones that really affect my day-to-day or my workflow. I'm not a big widgets on the lock screen person. Like some of the features super cool. Like I'm really impressed by the thing that takes PDF files and figures out when they are like fill-in forms and fills in that stuff automatically. But like I get a PDF that I have to fill in maybe once a year, so I haven't looked at that. So it hasn't really changed my life right now. And the Stage Manager enhancements are solid, but I actually like full screen.
Right. iPad as a traditional iPad.
I know that seems rare these days. Yeah. So yeah, it hasn't changed the world for me, but I am looking forward to getting out in the world and then apps getting updated and starting to see what people actually do with interactive widgets and things.
Yeah, for sure. So let's dive into your new app. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, it's all about creating transcripts from audio, directly integrates with Ferrite. Something I've wanted to do transcripts for a while for my podcast, but it's been just a problem I have not figured out how to solve, and this seems to be the perfect solution. So any kind of opening comments before you dive deeper into this app?
That's a broad question. I'm not quite sure where to tackle it from. It's a transcription app. You add audio to it, it turns it into text. It's the simple version, but it does it all privately on your device rather than in the cloud. So we don't have access to either the audio or the text that it creates.
And where did the idea for this come about? I mean, it seems like a natural fit with podcasting and the needs of podcasters, but where is there an origin story to this app?
How far back do you want to go? I mean, I've been doing research into this area for many years because it seems, as you say, like a natural fit for Ferrite. And many years ago, Apple added an API that let developers use Siri's transcription. When you talk to Siri, obviously it needs to be able to take what you're saying, turn that into text, and then it's that text that it tries to figure out what you're actually asking it to do. Yeah.
Drafts, I think, is the best example of using that technology, I think, to do, you're speaking to drafts and it's doing Siri-based, translation of that or transcription of your live audio. Yeah.
So that they had an API that let developers access that many years ago, but it was incredibly limited. I think initially it may have only supported English, and I think it had a hard limit of 1 minute of audio because it's designed for voice commands, not for transcribing podcasts and things. And then over time, they gradually relaxed some of those constraints. They supported more languages, and if you enabled on-device transcription, it could handle greater amounts of audio. But it was... And obviously I was interested in looking into this for Ferrite for all sorts of different reasons. Things like being able to search your library, being able to make transcripts of podcasts, potentially even using it to support editing features or, spotting potential problems, like maybe if you want to search for swear words across your whole podcast, something like that. But the quality was never high enough. It was incredibly slow. And the API had a lot of weird edges, like it would just say, I don't have support for that language, and it actually does, but what it means is I'm still downloading the data files for that language in the background. I have no progress reports for you. I cannot notify you when it's done. You're just going to have to put up with it saying no, can't do that, until one day when it will magically say yes, actually I can. That's not something I can build a feature around because I have no way to message what's going on to the user. I can't say, yeah, your phone is busy fetching this in the background. I don't know how long it'll take. And then it might get cleaned up because you're low on storage space, and then it'll stop working again. This isn't a way to build a feature. So I shelved it for a long time. And then the pandemic happened, and we all spent a lot more time talking to our friends online. And some friends and I had a weekly game night where we would all get on Discord and hang out with each other and play tabletop games. And the tabletop games we were playing were more sort of based around like investigating a mystery, that kind of thing. It would be important next week to remember what happened last week. And so I was taking extensive notes and so on so that I could write that up and send that out to the other players. And then next week, just before the session, we'd be able to skim through and remind ourselves what happened. but it was distracting for me because it was taking me out of the game. So eventually we're like, can we just record this and then transcribe it? And found a Discord bot called Craig that would essentially join the voice call and just record everything. And usefully, it would record each person on a separate audio file. And then at the end of the call, you could download all of those. And so I wrote what eventually became like a very, very early prototype of Transcriptionist for that purpose. And it was very crude. It was Mac only, and it was using this Siri technology that's slow and unreliable and just not very high quality. But it was just enough that I could throw these audio files at it, get a transcript that was sometimes hilariously bad, but I could read it and figure out what was being said. And because I had it set up so that I could play back the audio files, that was enough, because I could skim through all the stuff when we were talking about the TV program that we watched last night and see the bit where we were talking about the game and go, and then if it wasn't readable, at least I'd saved myself 30 minutes of scrubbing through audio files, because I could go straight to the bit I actually needed to listen to, and then I could type up the transcription. So it wasn't usable as a product. It wasn't something I would feel comfortable putting on the market, but it was usable enough for me that it was saving me a lot of time. And so it just sort of sat there as this weird little side project sitting on my Mac for a few months. And then a company called OpenAI dropped a technology called Whisper on the world and said, here you go, do whatever you like with this. And Whisper is a much, much faster, much, much higher quality transcription engine. And that was interesting. And it's also a complex, wobbly pile of Python scripts that runs on the command line and is quite complicated to install and figure out how to use. Then a guy in Bulgaria by the name of, I'm not sure how to, I don't know if it's pronounced Georgi or Georgi or something like that, but Georgi Gerganov figured out how to take that and distill it down to a little bit of regular C code that would allow it to run even on quite small devices. And at this point, this is very interesting, but it's still just an engine rather than a car. It takes audio in a very specific format and it spits out a kind of stream of consciousness of words, but it's not, an app. But this is the point where I thought, okay, I can take this and actually make something real out of it. So I took my prototype app, upgraded it with Whisper, just the hackiest way I could imagine, just to check if it would actually work. And it was so much faster and it was so much more accurate that it was just startling. And it changed the way that I actually made those write-ups, because rather than just using it to find the places to listen to, it was solid enough that I could just copy and paste paragraphs in. And that's when I said, okay, I'm going to start from scratch and write this properly and make a real app out of it. And that's what I've been working on for, all year, basically. So that is the very long background story to it.
I love it. That's really cool. And kind of goes right into another question I had of, podcasters use Ferrite. It's a very common use case of the app, but how else do you see people using your new transcript app? And one of your ways was, transcribing audio from a D&D game or board game, I should say.
It was neither. It was a tabletop role-playing game, but not D&D.
Okay.
We're playing sci-fi oriented games, so we're kind of zipping around in spaceships and things.
Very cool. But how else reporters, I'd imagine, could be using this? What other kind of use cases do you see?
There's just so much things you could do with it. With journalism, obviously just being able to have a transcription of an interview that you can publish is good, but also just being able to make a transcription to, again, be able to search through it so that you can find the pieces that you want to clip out, whether that's to find a quote to use as an article, or whether that's to find pieces that you know you're going to want to use. Like with a podcast like the one we're doing right now, you're very much just going to take both of our audio, all of it, into the editor and then just start tightening things up. But for something that's more in that kind of NPR, BBC, reportage documentary style, where they're, you might have a couple of people in the studio talking, and then they've got a reporter in the field, and then that person's doing an interview with somebody, but they're not going to do the whole interview. They're just going to take a couple of sentences to illustrate a point. Finding those sentences.
The 20 Max for 2020 Jason Snell did is kind of that style where he's taking just a snippet of audio and using this to find what is being said to grab that stuff would be useful.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that it's a nice style of production, but it's quite labor intensive because you do have to go through all that material. But having transcripts with timestamps and you know exactly where to go to, that can save so much time. And that's just one example. I mean, in general, I've had times when I have wanted to just say to somebody, oh, there's this video on YouTube that has something in it that's of interest to them, but I don't know the timestamp. Let's say hypothetically one had an app on one's desktop that could download a YouTube video, and hypothetically one were to drop that video into a transcription app. You could find the exact timestamp, and then you can link them back to YouTube, but with the little timestamp that's the exact right spot without you having to scrub through the whole thing to find the right place. And also, making subtitles for videos or all sorts of things like that. Potentially, I guess, if you're in a lecture, probably the best thing to do would be to get the original notes of the lecturer is reading from. Yeah. But if you can't get that, then, and you do have a recording, then you could get a transcript that way. That's another. There's just so many different uses for this that makes.
Yeah, you could even run it on. I imagine some universities release podcast official recordings of some lectures. You could run it on that nice clean audio from them. If they're not creating a transcript, you just do it yourself.
Yeah. I think it's also important for accessibility as well. Not everybody can listen to a podcast. So making that information searchable and accessible to everyone is very useful.
Yeah, for sure. Something I'm very curious about, this is not something available today or may ever be a thing, but the Descript audio editor which uses transcripts basically for the editing process. Do you see a future, 5 years from now where Ferrite could somehow integrate with this app to, let me remove all the ums from my audio and then I'll do my editing in Ferrite, or maybe do the whole editing process just with words and cutting stuff out in that way, like Descript does it?
That's definitely something I'm interested in. So one of the problems with this is that while it has pretty good timestamps, they're not necessarily accurate enough for editing.
Yeah,
like precisely.
Okay.
So actually taking that text and editing the text in order to edit the audio is probably not going to be feasible with this particular technology. Now, it may refine over time, but also it's also, even if it just helps narrow down, again, where you want to edit, it could be helpful for it to be more integrated. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, adding an extra 3 gigabytes to the Ferrite download size is not something I'm in a rush to do. For example, obviously, because there are different, we haven't gotten to this yet, but there are different sizes of AI brain that you can use. And the smallest ones, obviously, they take up less space. They're a lot faster, but they're going to be less accurate because they have less training data in them. Whereas the larger ones are going to be more accurate, but also slower and take up a lot more space. So one of the reasons why, because I guess this is part of the story as well, was I was thinking one of the ideas that I had for integrating this technology into Ferrite, as I mentioned, was things like being able to search your library, being able to search podcasts inside the projects and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Even though this technology is massively faster than what we were using before and massively more accurate, it's not so fast that we can just routinely scan your entire Ferrite library and have that up to date.
Yeah. Not yet. When we have the M10 iPad Pro or whatever. And
yeah, so maybe in future that is something that we could do. But in the meantime, that's just not going to be feasible because it will just kill your battery, and particularly because you can't do processing, or you can only do very limited processing in the background. The whole thing would mostly pause when you're not actually running the app, and so it could take like a month before, depending on the size of your library. Tim, who has a very large library,
by 300, 400 gigabyte library,
then that's going to be a problem.
Yes.
But because even if it scans some of your files and you go to search and it's just not a good experience if it's just missing a whole bunch of stuff because it hasn't had the chance to go through it all. So I was thinking, okay, what can we actually put into Ferrite that would be useful? And the obvious example is transcripts for finished podcasts, because then it only has to transcribe that specific data, not your whole library. And also Ferrite has a very basic video export, and it's not designed for creating or editing videos. It's just because for some reason a lot of social networks let you post video but not audio, which seems weird because the video takes up more space than the audio, so I'm not quite sure what they're thinking, but that's how it works. So
I upload my podcast as a video to YouTube as an option, and it's just a big thumbnail. But it would be cool to have a live
transcription.
That'd be cool.
Wouldn't it? So that's something I was thinking about. And the more I thought about that and different configuration options and all of that, the more I realized I was basically writing an entire extra app inside Ferrite, which is already a pretty big, complicated app that kind of didn't need to be there and would both take up space for all the Ferrite users who don't care about that, and also means that anyone who only cares about that would have to learn all of the rest of Ferrite, which they don't necessarily care about. So it just made so much more sense to make it a separate app. And that's kind of how we ended up here.
Have you considered within the Transcriptionist to have a video export option where it has that thing, as we're talking about, of just like a very kind of playful live or, animated text with different speakers and stuff?
It's absolutely on the list of things that I want to do. It did not make it for this, for version 1.0. I don't know when it will. I hope it will be. I don't know. I don't want to make any promises about when yet, but I have a thing sitting on my desktop that is like experimenting in that area. So that's all I'll say for now.
Because that'll be very cool. And it's also going to incentivize podcasters to use chapter markers, use images in those chapter markers, because if you integrate with that data, you could create a pretty engaging video of your image changing with the chapter marker and maybe the header of that chapter marker coming up and with the transcript.
Absolutely.
That could be pretty neat.
Yeah. I sort of see it. That's very much the kind of thing that I'm interested in supporting in a future version.
Excellent. So we spoke a little bit about the Siri transcript and that not quite being very useful for this app. Are there any other OS level technologies that made this something a reality at this point in time? The Apple Neural Engine's a thing. I'm not sure if that is helpful in this regard.
The Neural Engine is certainly used within Transcriptionist. It's not essential, and I was developing Transcriptionist for a while before Apple Neural Engine support was added, and it was working fine. But when it can activate the Neural Engine, it's about 2 to 3 times faster, perhaps more, depending on your exact settings and yada, yada, yada. Some of the AI brains are too big to fit on the Neural Engine, so it's not available for every combination of settings. But you will find that the smaller brains are not just a little bit faster, but enormously faster.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. Yeah, and it's interesting the different brain sizes, as we'll dive into later, but there may be uses for, let me just run a tiny brain scan versus just to get the rough transcript versus let me pull out the large brain and let my iPad run overnight to grind on that thing.
I'm trying to think how long that. I wouldn't expect it actually takes overnight necessarily. I suppose it depends on the settings, but it probably does take quite some time.
Yeah, depending on the podcast. Like, I was doing one that had 2 guests plus myself, and it was like a nearly 2-hour conversation. So, it felt like it would have been overnight, but it was a fair bit for it to just using the large brain. It does add more time as you go up the complexity of the AI model it's using.
I mean, with the tiny brain, because our weekly game night is about 2 hours, and there's about 5 of us, depending on who makes it.
Yeah,
and that on the tiny brain, that takes less than 5 minutes, usually 3 to 5 minutes, which is very nice. As you say, as you go up the brains, it gets slower. I think the large brain, at least now this is on a desktop Mac, so obviously it's got a lot more grunts to throw at the problem.
You're using a Mac Studio? What are you using with it?
Yeah, I've got a Mac Studio. I think it's the Max. Not at all confusingly named.
Not
Max
at all.
Mac. Yep, the M1 Max Mac.
Yes.
That's my main dev machine. And I think you're looking at about, I would expect for the setup you would take, talking about maybe 2 to 3 hours at the outside, but it does depend. And there may be things like thermal throttling if you're on an iPad that doesn't have any active cooling and stuff like that. So you may find that the device itself is slowing down after a while just because it's working so hard.
No, and 2 to 3 hours is probably a good estimate of that, to be fair. It just, I just kind of leave my iPad and go do something else for a bit. I'd imagine with Stage Manager, you could actually have it in the stage and be fine with how Stage Manager treats apps as they're all kind of foregrounded. Like I can do video exports and have it in the background of a stage. As long as that stage is up and running, it behaves itself. But I just tend to leave it and go off and do something else. As far as the speed of how everything works, what resources is this app tapping into? I know RAM is a big part, especially on iPad. The large brain needs that 16 gigabyte model available with the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte M iPads. But
that may not be true at launch. We'll see. Right now it does, but we're still tweaking the settings on that.
Cool.
Because it does need quite a bit of memory to load. And for people who may not keep track of it, we're not just talking about the storage space. If you get, like, as you say, the 2 terabyte iPad, we're not just talking about that space, but the actual working memory, the RAM in the machine.
In iPad world, Apple does not let you configure a 256 gigabyte iPad with 16 gigs of RAM. They just say, once you hit 1 terabyte, we'll also sell you the 16 gigabytes, include that in the cost, which is why the price jump is so great. Going to 1 terabyte, you're also paying the $200 for the RAM. Yeah. But is it the CPU that's also being taxed? Are you able to tap into the GPU? What kind of
not really using the GPU other than, just in the usual way as part of rendering the user interface. Okay. But both the CPU and the neural engine, when it can, are going to be taxed extensively. And it's using multiple cores as well, so that if we have these high core count devices these days, essentially multiple CPUs, more or less, in there on the system on the chip. A whole bunch of them are going to be put to work on the task as, it can kind of fan out the work to these different cores and then gather it back together again. If you have an older, slower device, that shouldn't prevent you using a particular brain as long as you have the memory for it. So
it'll just take longer.
A slow device, exactly. But the memory is a limiting factor in terms of what size of brain you can use, because it does need to load the whole thing into memory, and the largest one is over 3 gigs, and it needs not just space for the brain, but also to process it and to store the audio that's being processed, as well as the rest of the app and the operating system and everything else. So it adds up.
Now with swap, Macs handle memory swapping in and out very fluidly.
Yeah.
And Apple's mentioned in passing like that's now a thing sort of with M series iPads. Is that true or not really true?
It's not really terribly clear to us as developers what exactly is going on there.
Okay.
My suspicion, and this is purely me like hypothesizing, I don't know. My suspicion is that they are probably, when you switch apps with Stage Manager on an M1 iPad, they are probably, whereas on other iPads, when the system memory gets low, it just kills off apps.
Right.
They may instead be sort of freeze drying them into swap instead, and then bringing them back more rapidly than if they had to warm the whole thing up from scratch, because they can just sort of reheat it.
Okay.
That's my guess. I don't actually know. The funny thing is, they've always supported virtual memory, just not at a system level. Or rather, it's in the kernel, but it's not in the OS, if that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. What I mean is, one of my other apps, Hoxai, actually does this. If you want to work with a file that is bigger than memory, you can, by essentially mapping that into the address space, which is a whole complex technical thing that probably your listeners don't care about. But effectively, it's about it's not exactly swap, but it's maybe half of swap, in that to the app, it looks like the whole thing is loaded into memory. But what's actually going on behind the scenes is the operating system is loading little pieces of the file into memory on demand. So that's almost a swap. The difference is that if you modify it, it doesn't write the changes back again.
Gotcha.
He said, and then wonders if that's true. That might not be strictly true. The main difference, though, overall, is that you have to manage that process yourself. You have to say, this file with these contents that I'm going to map over here, and I'm going to access it in this way. It can't automatically say, you've just used too much memory, so I'm going to throw this stuff onto disk. Wow, they got a lot more obtuse than it really needs to. Never mind.
Yeah. So something that you mentioned in kind of the opening about this app is one of the brilliant things of working with Ferrite is traditionally you'll edit each person on their own track. And this app will make sure you are very good about that and don't try to in the past, sometimes I would put the opening, 30-second preview of the episode on a different track, and now I'm being good and putting it where it should be, so that person is reflected in the transcript. And so as you export for the transcript, each person's on their own track, which is very awesome for a lot of different reasons. How's it handle crosstalk and things like that within this, where it knows who's speaking, and what are the kind of ramifications of this multi-track approach?
So crosstalk is just not an issue at all as long as you are importing multi-track files. Like if you were to take a finished podcast MP3 file and drop it in, which you can, you're then obviously crosstalk is going to confuse it because it just has a single file where the audio is already mixed together. But if you are taking multi-track audio, whether that's from Ferrite or something else, then it's processing each stream independently. So the crosstalk is just not an issue because it never hears it. It only ever hears one track at once. It might look a bit weird when you're reading the transcript because obviously if two people are talking at the same time, it can't overprint the text, so it has to pick one to go first.
We're not in a Vision Pro world where you have layers of three-dimensional textures.
Yeah, so it is going to pick an order, and So there's that. But, it should be fine. It should be readable. The way that it displays the transcripts, there's a bar down the left-hand side of each paragraph that shows progress.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just a single bar from the top to the bottom of the podcast. Each paragraph has its own little bar. And what that means is if two people are talking at the same time, both of the bars will be moving independently. So you might see one of them start to move as they start talking, and then the other person starts speaking, and their bar is also moving at the same time, which I think that description might be a bit confusing, but I think when you actually see it in the app, it makes perfect sense, because you're just like, oh yeah, that person's talking, their bar is moving. Yeah, obvious.
This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by Agenda. Agenda 18.1 is now available with support for interactive widgets in iPadOS 17, and now supports advanced data protection for those using that with iCloud. In this quick break, I want to share a little bit about Agenda 18, which was just released a little bit over a month ago. First up, Agenda now with version 18 now has a very robust locking and password system, where you can now lock individual notes, entire projects, or the entire Agenda app. To lock an individual note, you simply click on the little note indicator next to the note title, which indicates if the note is on the agenda, off the agenda, or completed. You'll now see an option there to lock that note. When you lock a note, you choose whatever password you'd like to use, and you can also gain access to that locked agenda content with Face ID, Touch ID, or even the Apple Watch to unlock it on the Mac. To lock a project, you simply hit the triple dot icon next to the project name in the sidebar. To lock the entirety of Agenda, you simply enable that in the settings of Agenda. Agenda 18 also brought with it a very robust color organizational system. In the past, notes could be marked with different colors, but now you can set up tons of different custom colors that you can now rename to whatever you want. I've started to use this system to bring attention to the notes I need to focus on and other notes that are ongoing and don't need my immediate attention. Many will use red, yellow, and green to indicate the note status, and using that same on the agenda circle next to the note title, you can click on that to assign a color to any note. When you assign a color to a note, the note itself will show that color in the background. It does this in a very pleasant way using a very non-saturated version of that color, similar to what Apple would do with the iPhone 15 colors, making the notes very readable and opens you up to using the entire color wheel. You can also change the color of text within an agenda note to be one of those colors. So for instance, you can change just a single line of an outline to be something that needs attention, whereas the rest of the note may be just in the standard black color versus that single line which may need your attention. On top of this is the new filtering and sorting options. As an example, if you open up the On the Agenda overview, you can, by tapping or clicking the header text on the agenda, change how those notes are organized for you. By default, it'll group all the notes by the project and sort them by the assigned date. You can now tap the header of that window that by default says by assigned date, and here choose to group notes by project, color, or ungrouped. The color option can be especially powerful, allowing you to focus in on notes across several projects. And using this new color system of custom named colors, you can really be pretty creative as far as how you want to organize your agenda library. You can then sort notes by assigned date, creation date, edited date, or title. So that is just some of what is new in Agenda 18. If you haven't tried Agenda yet, I'd really encourage you to download it and give it a try. Agenda is free to download and use with no obtrusive ads. To unlock the full power of Agenda, give Agenda Premium a shot. One thing that Agenda continues to do that I love is their approach to premium features and unlocks. If you ever decide to cancel your Agenda Premium subscription, you get to keep all of the premium features available to you when you are a subscriber. Or you can now opt for their new lifetime unlock, which will unlock the full power of Agenda on all your Apple devices with a single one-time purchase. To learn more, go to agenda.com. Download Agenda 18 today for free from the App Store. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com.
As far as you mentioned, one of the earliest ones, this was very critical of listening to audio and correcting the typos. you'll still need to do some of that, not as much, depending on which brain you use. What's that process like of playing back and, fixing the different text?
I don't think we've actually described what it looks like in app yet. So
yeah,
the layout depends on whether if you're using like a tiny little iPhone screen, then it's just a single column. But on iPad or Mac, it's a 2-column view where you've got the right-hand column is the actual text itself, and the left has the sort of information like the person speaking and the timestamps and stuff like that. So you can just click on any of those timestamps and it will play back to that point. And if you double click, it will start playing as well, because it doesn't just give you the text and then throw the audio away. The audio is still part of the document, so you can always refer back to it. So if you aren't sure what was said, and because there are a lot of words in the English language that sound the same but are written completely different. And while it can usually guess from context, it can't always. So, there are occasionally points where it can get confused, where you can just double click and listen to the audio. And it supports variable speed, so you can listen back at 2x speed if you want to. You can also, crosstalk is an issue for the app, but it might be for you. So if you're listening to a bit where everyone was talking at once, you can just solo a particular person and hear what they were saying that got lost, or just mute somebody who's being a bit too loud and listen to everyone else. Obviously, there's full search and replace. So you can use that to find stuff within the document and then just go in and click on the text that you want to change, or replace text throughout, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Something I experienced pretty quick is I have a Ellis Island last name that was just made up on the spot at immigration. And the model has no idea that this word is a word. So I am Tim Chen, based on the transcript. Is there a way that you foresee in the future to add custom words to the model in some way?
So, as I mentioned, the models were trained by this company, OpenAI, who just threw tens of thousands of hours of audio and transcripts to train.
Yeah.
It is theoretically possible to refine these models. It's also an incredibly complex, time-consuming, processor-consuming, and just generally confusing process.
So it's not as easy as telling my iPhone this red-lined word is
real. Yeah. But Transcriptionist isn't using the models and just saying, well, that's it, job done. Yeah. It's pre-processing your audio before it even gets sent into the model. And it's also cleaning up the output from the model afterwards. Sorry, I'm using the word model and just throwing that around. This is what we mean by, these are the AI brains. The technical term is the model. So, and the AI brain is just, as I mentioned before, just throwing out a kind of a stream of consciousness of words. So Transcriptionist is post-processing that, cleaning it up, figuring out whether it's speech or whether it's... Because it also transcribes some noises, like if you laugh or something like that, it will often pick up on that.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, oh, that's a really nice touch.
And so Transcriptionist will try and detect that and will actually mark that separately in the transcription. And so when you're looking at it in the app, I think it just puts it in italics. But you can treat that separately when you export it. So it's also got a whole bunch of other post-processing that it does. Again, this isn't something I've fully thought through. It's just something that's been rattling around in the back of my brain. But it might be nice to add a settings tab or something like that where you can add your own post-processing. So if it's always spelling your surname a particular way, and you could possibly... Because you can already... use search and replace to fix that, but it's just annoying if you have to do it for every document.
Right, so in settings you'd have, if it has Chen, I never will probably say Chen unless I have a guest with that,
Well, what you could put is like Tim Chen, because that's not going to trigger on much unintentionally.
Right, exactly.
So then you just correct that to Tim, how it should be. Chatton.
Yes.
And... have that kind of search and replace performed automatically as it's performing the transcription.
Yeah.
Because both the apps, because the app's search and replace has full regular expression support, and that's also what's being used for some of the post processing that's going on behind the scenes. So all of that can come together to make quite a powerful system for enabling you to clean up the transcriptions afterwards.
Yeah. No, very cool. And as we mentioned before, chapter markers are very incentivized to use those in Ferrite, and listeners will appreciate it as well. But it is so nice. I use tons of chapter markers, and when I do the transcript, it makes reading through your transcript so much easier to just jump to these big headers. What are some of the other things that are supported in here? I know like URLs are brought in and things like that.
Yeah, so it will bring through the chapter titles, artwork, and links. You can also edit the text and artwork in Transcriptionist. You can't yet edit the links. I forget why. I think there was a reason. It may just be something that didn't get done in time for 1.0. But those come through automatically from Ferrite. If you import an MP3 or even, I guess, an M4A that has chapter markers in it, it will also pick it up from those.
Yeah.
And you can add your own manually within the app. Ferrite supports exporting chapter markers as JSON files. If you drop those files in, you can import those, but you don't really need to because it's got integration directly anyway. But if you were somehow if you edit podcasts in something else, if you can convince that something else to export JSON of the same layout, you could drop that into Transcriptionist, it would work. And it's a very straightforward format. It's just like, it has the timestamp and the text, and yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I was just brainstorming as you were speaking. It'd be cool if the chapter marker thing within the transcript supported video files. So if you're speaking about like a video game and this video export feature eventually would be able to play back like a trailer of a game you're talking about silently or something like that. That would be just I don't know, another thing for the bucket list.
One of the things I have on the bucket list is if you do transcribe video, which I should say some videos are supported right now, not all of them are. The reason for this is obscure technical stuff, but basically some of iOS's audio APIs also accept video, but only some videos, and it's not really clear why.
Are they like the Apple MP4 native ones, probably an MOV? Or
you'd think so, but not all of them.
Okay,
it's weird. So some videos are currently supported. I hope to add, because Ferrite will import all videos that your iPad can play, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have something like VLC installed, that can have its own video playback code that might support formats that the iPad doesn't understand. But anything that the iPad can natively play back should import into Ferrite. That's not yet the case for Transcriptionist, but I hope to use the same code from Ferrite to make that the case in Transcriptionist. It's just a little tricky for some technical reasons to do with how file handling is different between iPad and Mac.
Yeah.
It's not something we need to get into now, but it's planned. What I was thinking is if you add a chapter marker to a transcript that is sourced from a video file, it could potentially grab the image from that timestamp from the video as the chapter art.
That'd be cool.
Just another idea.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah.
On the list of things that may get looked at one day.
Yes. Something that just struck me right away when using this app is just how beautiful the transcripts are. You can color code the people. Like, it just looks very visually appealing in a way that you think is just text, but it does a good job with that. What are some of the like export options available? You mentioned before the closed captioning, but there are, you can even do custom exports, and the HTML will kind of mimic what you see in the app, which is really nice.
In terms of how the app looks inside the app, I think this is the most Apple-like, for good or ill, of the apps that I've made, in that it's very much using standard fonts and but trying to make it feel like if Apple made a transcription app. The color coding you mentioned, that was something that I find very useful when looking through the transcripts to quickly identify who says what. If you name your audio files consistently, it will actually try to learn that. And so for me, each week when I import our audio files from our game night, it already knows who they are and what their color codes are, so that each week they always have the same color codes for the same people. So to me, I now know that my character has this color and that character has that color, and so it really helps when looking through the transcripts. Getting back to your question about exports, the built-in formats are Markdown, obviously very popular. Two different subtitle formats, SRT and VTT. They're very similar. The main difference is that VTT supports color coding.
Okay.
And that will use the colors that you have set up from the transcript. It supports CSV files, which is comma separated values. It's basically what it's kind of like an interchangeable spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And
I'm curious
about just a simple table.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, you wouldn't think spreadsheets and what are the uses of the CSV?
That's mainly for people who already have some kind of workflow in place that they want to be able to put transcripts into, just because it's a very common format for sending data from one app to another.
Yeah.
Often because if you imagine it as a spreadsheet, they would have one column with the timestamp, one column with the name, and then one column with the text.
Yeah.
And it's just very simple, but it means that they can get that data from Transcriptionist into something they might already have on the system. And we've got HTML and PDF, and they both support styling. As you mentioned, there's a couple of default styles that mimic what you see in the app, with either the one-column iPhone style layout or the two-column iPad and Mac style layout. You can have it completely unstyled if you just want the HTML to paste into something, a web page you already have. But there's also a few other styles, and I'm planning to increase the number over time. So there's one that looks like a iMessage chat bubbles.
Yeah,
that's already in there.
Oh, it is. Okay, yeah. I've not.
It's not quite iMessage style, because in iMessage the speech, the tails of the speech bubbles are at the bottom, but that looks slightly weird because it's more helpful to have the names above the people speaking. So I moved it to the top just so that it makes more sense that way.
Yeah.
And it will actually do the left-right thing. If you pick somebody's color code to be gray, it will assume that they're the host.
Okay.
And then use all the colorful bubbles as the guests, so that you can have like an interview style thing.
Yeah.
If nobody has the gray color code, then it will just distribute them to the left and right.
Yeah.
Sort of. It's not random, but I forget how it picks. But it's a bit more scattered. There's a few other styles that are just kind of like simple business-like styles for if people need to send transcripts for work and don't want it looking, too crazy or anything.
Right.
And then, the other thing is that you can actually create your own export formats. So if you already have an app that needs, say, a JSON file in a particular format, or if you want to export Markdown, but you have a particular format that you want to export it in. So, for example, for the write-ups that I do for our game nights, I'm typing those up in a Markdown editor. I could export the whole transcript, but what I do instead is you can use these export formats for copy and paste as well. And so you can make a format and say, this is the format to use for copying, regardless of what I choose to export documents in. So that means that I can select a paragraph or several paragraphs in the transcription, copy, paste into my Markdown editor, and those quotes and the text and everything is formatted exactly how I want them to look in the write-up. And that's specified using a custom format. If you've used stuff like this before, you might be used to having to type obscure command, sort of like control codes, like $name or %@ or something like that. There's none of that here. You just type exactly what you want to appear, but where you want something like a person's name, there's a button, and on the Mac it's below the text field. It's an actual just a clicky button, and on iPhone or iPad it's attached to the top of the software keyboard, or if you're using an external keyboard, that kind of lozenge shaped nugget that appears at the bottom of the screen. You just tap that and pick name or timestamp or text or whatever else it is that you want to be inserted. When you type an email address or something into Mail and it turns from plain text into this sort of pill-shaped nugget.
Yeah.
It does the same thing with that. So you've got this little editable nugget and you just tap on that and a menu pops up with customization options. So if you want the timestamp to be, 3M 4S, or if you want it to be, 3 mins 46, or if you want it to be, 3,600, just a number, because you're actually going to send this to another application and it doesn't want to have to parse it. It just wants the exact timestamp. Or, I think YouTube timestamp links use that format, or whatever it might be that you want to export. You can have it exactly the right format, and you don't have to type in any obscure codes. It's just a pop-up menu and pick the options.
Yeah. Have you experimented? I know we spoke about video as a future project, but have you experimented with just pure audio as like an HTML audio player and using the transcripts in some way for those that want to just put their podcasts on their website and have the transcript go along with it in a synchronized way?
This is something I'm interested in. It's an idea that's been knocking around in my head since before I was working on this app, when I was just thinking about it purely in terms of Ferrite.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that people host their podcasts in so many different ways with so many different podcast playback widgets that making that compatible with everyone's different website is going to be tricky. I think if you were technical enough, I'm pretty sure you could do that using the custom formats, because you can say how each paragraph should look.
Yeah.
And there's no reason, you can use the timestamp thing multiple times. So you could have a timestamp visible for the person reading it, but you could also have a timestamp in a little bit of JavaScript that's going to get sent to the player widget to jump it to the right position. And you could, as well as how you want the paragraphs to look, you can include stuff to go at the top and bottom, so that you could include those little bits of JavaScript into the page somehow. You're going to need to be pretty technical to set up something like that. So in theory, that's possible.
Yeah.
I might at some point look into doing that using the default HTML5 audio player widgets, but they're not going to work for everyone because their podcast host might refuse to support those, because they, sometimes you need to get some kind of API key and fetch that before, and then submit that when you request the audio and yada yada. So,
yeah, I do really hope one day that transcripts become part of the metadata for a podcast, where you could have that, like, because it'd be kind of stupid to put this as in your show description, episode description, because I think there's a character cutoff probably in most of those. But it'd be nice if there was a whole separate field for just the transcript, where, Apple Podcasts and Overcast could like have that be a live thing, like they do live lyrics. Why not live transcripts?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They've got the infrastructure in place for that somewhere in the background somewhere, right? Or, maybe it's not part of the podcast app, but I'm sure that they could, the Apple Podcasts team could walk over to the Apple Music team and ask them for a copy of the code.
Yes.
And, Marco's a smart guy. He can put that together as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So if there is a way to specify that, and it seems like, I don't know if it would be something to go into the MP3 itself or something to go into the RSS feed.
Right.
That's, that metadata.
Yeah.
Either way, I mean...
An Apple Podcast could do it directly just for their player if they wanted to on their own Podcast Connect thing. You can upload your custom episode artwork. You could upload your transcript there. It'd be nice if it was a more universal format that just, in the RSS feed did it. Yeah.
It would be nice.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things that it needs a lot of other people to agree on things.
Yes. Are there best practices in your mind for how podcasters should share transcripts? What have you seen out as you're exploring transcripts? Is this something that people just put on their kind of episode website, with the show notes? They have the transcript there? Or?
For people who have a separate page for each episode of the podcast, if they're going to put transcripts, they're often on that page or linked from it. I think that it's still a new enough thing that best practices haven't yet coalesced around that. So I'm not quite sure what everyone is doing. It seems to be, pretty scattered at the moment, whether it's supported or not, and if so, how. Yeah, I do think that that is something that people could get together on, even if it doesn't end up inside the podcast players themselves, although it'd be nice if they did.
Yeah.
If there was a more standardized way, in the same way that, websites link to their RSS feeds or link to their fav icon or whatever, there's a standard place to find it.
Yeah.
Maybe there should be a standard place to find the transcript for again, even if they don't put the transcripts in the RSS feed, it seems like it would be trivial to add a link to where they can be found.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. For the moment, I've been using the Markdown export and putting it on the episode page. But I do wonder long term if it would make sense to have some kind of link I could put in the episode description, and you click the link, it just pulls up the transcript in some neat way. We've talked about the brains a bit. It's currently shipping with 8 brains, tiny brain. I think that's correct. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. We have a tiny brain.
There's tiny, basic, small, medium, and large.
And then multilingual versions of most of those, except for large.
Yeah.
And tiny, maybe? Yeah.
No, tiny is available in both.
It is, okay. Is there an English-only large? That does not even exist. Okay.
No. The thing is, if you look at the sizes, it's more than twice the size of the English-only medium. And like I say, so the thing about it is, the larger the brain, the more training data there is room for.
Yeah.
And so the reason why an English-only brain is going to be better than a multilingual brain for English-only transcriptions is that all of the space, all of that, I forget what it is, it's like 70, 90 megs, something like that.
Yeah.
All of that space is taken up just with English training data. Also supporting 100 other languages, which very nearly is. I think it's about 98, I think I counted them up at. Then obviously there's less available for each language. But when you're talking about the large brain, it's already 3 gigabytes. It doesn't actually, the fact that some of that's shared out amongst other languages doesn't have as much impact as it does with smaller brains, because it's already got so much to work with.
So if I'm just doing an English podcast, I've got the medium English only and the large multilingual. The large for English only podcast would still be the better result than the medium English only in your mind. And
probably, I think you'd have to try it and see
I'm
for
kind of
yourself.
curious about that.
It's, as with anything involving AI, there aren't always hard and fast answers, because this is kind of taking a huge amount of data and then trying to distill it.
Yeah. And
it can often depend on exactly what it is that you're trying to transcribe, and, what exactly it's been trained on and all of this stuff. And so it can occasionally have, you might find surprising results, often in a good way. Like, one of the things that took me aback when I first used this technology was that, when we're playing our tabletop role-playing game, we often be saying things like, my character says blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And what I was surprised by was in the transcript, it would say, my character says, open quotes, close quotes. I'm like, it's picked up that that's a quotation.
Huh.
How did that surprises me.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of things like that and that's the sort of thing that you start to see get more accurate as the brain size goes up. Like, there are bits where the very largest models will start adding more punctuation detail, like M dashes between sort of thoughts that are a bit disjointed, and dot 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 at the end of a sentence that trails off, and you're like, that's getting kind of spooky. So in terms of the medium or the large, I would try it and see. You might find that the large generally is going to have the better results, but the medium might not be far behind if you are doing English only and you're using the English only brain.
Yeah.
And it might be that the speed improvements makes it more worthwhile to use that one anyway.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And then within there's the option, I think it's on by default, the look ahead, where it's kind of looking ahead, 10 seconds, or kind of to figure the context of the sentence.
It's not quite as simple. So it processes audio in 30-second chunks.
Okay.
But there's a little bit of overlap, obviously, because audio might cross between them. So it's not as simple as saying, it's 10 seconds or whatever. But what happens is, as it's going through, the simplistic way and the way that it does it, if you don't have look ahead on, is it listens to the audio and it tries to figure out what word this is, or what piece of a word sometimes. It picks the most likely thing. And it says, right, well, because with machine learning models, what they tend to do is they don't say, this is the word. What they say is, here are all the words that I know, sorted into order of how likely it is that this is what was said. So at the top of the list is the most likely word, and then the second most likely word. And if you've ever used, if you've been talking to Siri and you get the little blue underline and you tap it and it has alternate suggestions, those are the things that are like second or third in Siri's list that it's thinking you might mean instead. With look ahead off, it just takes the top item on the list and moves on to the next word or piece of a word. With look ahead on, it considers like I think it's like 2 or 3 words or pieces of words, technically tokens. I'm making little bunny ears here for the listeners at home, and sees what's the most likely combination of words. So the example I give in the user guide is the word I is a lot more common in English than the word ice. So if it just hears I, then it's going to say, that's probably the word I.
Yeah.
But the phrase I scream is a lot less common than the foodstuff ice cream.
Yes.
So if it hears the I and then the next bit is scream, then probably you said ice cream.
Right.
And so it shouldn't just jump to assuming that you said I and then having to try and...
Unless you're telling a pun or whatever. Yeah.
Indeed. And, then it's going to be a bit... You may need to correct it if it doesn't have a sense of humour.
Yeah.
Yet.
Yeah.
This can particularly help where one of the things that can throw transcriptions off is if it guesses what the word you said was, but then that means that the words after it don't make sense, and it's trying to make sense of them. And so having a little bit of this look ahead where it can take that context into account and realize that, so it doesn't get into a dead end of trying to figure out what you're saying. And because it has to consider more possibilities, it's slightly slower than with it off, which is why there's a switch for it. But in general, it gives good results and is like the speed difference isn't a lot. I don't have measurements to hand, but I'm guessing about 10% sort of thing. Whereas going to the next AI brain might make a much bigger jump. So that's what that does.
Okay. And then the neural engine, what's that cutoff? Is basic, or like when does the neural engine
currently Tiny and Basic both use the neural engine. In theory, Small could use the neural engine, but there seems to be a problem with... So when you download a brain that uses the neural engine, the first time you select it, it needs to basically optimize it for your device, because all of the different devices have slightly different neural engines.
Yeah, I was wondering how much that's improved over the years, the neural engine. I'm sure a little bit.
So, So when you do that, and Apple starts off a process in the background that is optimizing that.
Yeah.
Sometimes Apple's process just gets wedged. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's something they're going to fix in a future update, and it's fine for the tiny brain and the basic brain. the small brain sometimes works, sometimes gets wedged. Because it's not reliable, I've turned Neural Engine off for the small brain because then it will always work. And when I say wedged, the problem is on a Mac, you can open up Activity Monitor, see the process and go, oh, that's wedged, and I will kill it, and now it's going to work. On the iPad, you don't get to do that. So that's not something that I can gamble on and say, oh, hey, try it out and see if it works. Maybe it will. I have to turn it off because otherwise it could just sit there draining somebody's battery. So that's why I've made that choice. At some point in the future, it might get, reliable, the compiler that's running in the background may always work and only take a minute, say, in which case, then I can re-enable that. But larger than that, it doesn't really work. So that was the small brain. So the medium and large don't fit into the Neural Engine at all, so they just don't use it.
Okay. And are there other brains you hope to add in the future? I wasn't sure, is there a Japanese only brain? Do other languages have is English the only special blessed
English
language?
is the only one that has it's got its own dedicated set of brains. Partly that's just because of it's become this international language despite being terrible language for that, because it's, there's all these memes about, how English is all these other languages smushed together in the first place, and it's just kind of terrible.
Yeah, we as a English native, we always made fun of our language as kids. The teachers did with breaking all the rules our language does, and it's just not a great language as far as
and very difficult to learn. So it's kind of amazing that people all over the world have learned it.
Yes, exactly.
But they have, and that's very good of them. And so it means that it does get used a lot all over the place. So that's part of it, and partly I'm guessing it's just because OpenAI themselves are, in English. I guess, American, I assume.
American, What's their communication like as far as do they have a timeline as far as here's how often we update the models? Is there an
They have updated one of them. I think they brought out a new version of the large model, but it's not. I'm actually using the old version because I'm not sure the update is necessarily better.
Okay.
It may be in some circumstances. It's something to look into.
Yeah.
But so there aren't plans for that at the moment. They haven't announced anything. I don't know whether they will. There are other companies that are doing similar things. Meta have brought out one recently, literally about a week ago.
Yeah.
But that's non-commercial use only.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be able to use that.
Gotcha.
But theoretically, other models could be integrated if other models come along. There is the possibility to do specialized retraining. That's what I mentioned earlier about taking these models and then refining them with additional training. That's something that can be done.
Yeah, it'd be fun to have for an additional fee, train an AI model on all of my podcasts.
The thing is, in order to train it, you do already need accurate transcripts.
Oh, gotcha. That would make sense. You have to pair it with audio and text, yeah. So, very notably, this app is also on the Mac, as we've spoken about. It's not just iPad and iPhone. There's no Apple Watch version quite yet. I don't think that would be kind of visible.
That's, not going to happen.
Right. But I'm curious, and this is very handy if you want to use, say, the large AI brain and you don't have one of those higher-end iPads. And as we spoke about, the CPU is used. So if you have a Mac Studio, it'll use that CPU to great advantage for speed. But what's the workflow like in getting, say, a podcast edited on Ferrite on the iPad over to the Mac version of this app in a nice way?
So the way that they're integrated is that when you go to export a project in Ferrite, one of the options you can pick is for transcription. And when you do that, what it actually does is it creates a not quite blank, but nearly blank transcriptionist document.
Yeah.
And that document has all of the chapters and stuff like that set up already. It has all of the audio imported already, but it obviously doesn't have any of the transcription itself done yet. And then you just pick Transcriptionist from the standard OS share sheet, and it will get sent across. Well, if you want to do it on the Mac, you can just use AirDrop to send it to the Mac, or you could save it to iCloud Drive or Dropbox or whatever, and then you can just open it on your Mac.
Brilliant. Yeah, that makes total sense. And yeah, as I've been doing the exports for Transcriptionist, I've just always picked it. But yeah, it is just a share sheet. You can send it anywhere you want. Total sense.
And it's making an actual Transcriptionist document in Ferrite, so it doesn't actually have to do any importing or worrying about that stuff at the other end. You've just got a Transcriptionist document. It just hasn't had the transcribe button pushed yet.
Yeah. Now, something I realized that I needed to change, I think, in Ferrite, as far as my transcript export, is I typically have a mono of my spoken voices and music on just 2 tracks that I work with for the MP3 export, and I mute the individual speakers for the final export, typically for MP3. When I tried that to transcript, is there a way to actually go in within Transcriptionist to unmute a track that is otherwise muted in your multi-track?
If you've muted a track and export that, it's going to just not export.
So muted tracks are not in the transcript export. So that's
no, because it's muted.
Right.
Now you've got me thinking, is that true? I'm pretty sure it's true. Should be true.
Okay.
I could fire it up and double check, but I'm pretty sure that's how it's supposed to work.
Okay. So what I've been doing is I've been muting the music tracks as well. So basically what I'm doing is just unmute the speakers and mute everything else that's not needed for the transcript. That's the best kind of practice for the export.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you just, if you include the music, you will probably just get some bits that say music in the transcript on its own.
Yeah.
It appears as a separate sort of person.
Yeah.
That it's the music. But as long as it's on a separate track so that it's not interfering with other people, it's just, you probably don't need it, but it probably isn't going to hurt.
Okay. And then, in what ways is the Mac app different from the iPad app, if any? Are there any Mac native kind of features that it takes advantage of?
So in terms of features, I've tried to, as much as possible, to make all features available everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you do purchase it on one platform, you'll be able to use it on all of them.
Okay, excellent.
As long as they're signed into the same App Store account, obviously. Yep. But in terms of the user interface, obviously the Mac version, it's not a Catalyst app. It's not one of these cross-platform Electron apps. It's a fully native app. So it's going to take advantage of Mac user interface conventions. Now, over time, the iPad's user interface conventions have changed to be more Mac-like, and the Mac's user interface conventions have changed to be a little bit more iPad-like. So they're not that different. If you move from one to the other, you're going to be right at home, and you're going to see the same buttons in the same places. But on the Mac, they're going to look like Mac buttons that are slightly different to iPad ones. And that extends obviously to the native controls, but also to the custom ones, like the color picker, where you pick the highlight color for different people. On the Mac, those are essentially radio buttons, but with the backgrounds filled in with the different colors. And then on the iPad, it's not so different, but they instead have little white rings that mark the highlighted one, and that's modeled after the iPad's native color picker. So there's stuff like that, but essentially you're going to be looking at something that works the same way. Now, obviously on the Mac, you have the full set of Mac menus along the top of the screen with all of the stuff that you would expect to find there, and some of the things that you can only access from the toolbar on the iPad because it doesn't have anything else, are in the menus on the Mac. So, for example, and things like the switching brains on the Mac, you can just bring up the settings using the usual place in the application menu, or Command comma, I think is the shortcut. Yeah. And changing languages is done from, I think, the edit menu. So, and chapters, there's a chapter menu in the main menu. So that's useful for quickly navigating around inside the document, whereas on the iPad, you'd do that from the toolbar. The dock icon shows progress on the Mac.
Oh, very
That's
cool.
something that we don't have any way to do on iPad.
No, that'd be a neat thing for Apple to add some kind of app icon updating there.
Yeah. But yeah, so there's that, and that will show up both in the dock and also when you Alt-Tab. So
nice.
if you just quickly Alt-Tab, you'll see progress for Transcriptionist if it's transcribing in the background.
Is there any kind of menu bar icon? I know some apps can put stuff up there.
I thought about that, but I didn't think it provides enough utility since the dock already shows the progress, and because it's there's some apps that are menu bar only, but because this is a document editing app, that doesn't really make sense.
No.
And what else? Obviously, it's a proper Mac app, so editing, when you open and save documents, you're just doing that through Finder with the standard open and save sheets, whereas on the iPad, it's using the iPad document browser.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you can drag and drop audio from Finder into Transcripts or whatever. So it's all properly integrated on the Mac.
And then the documents save in iCloud Drive. So if you do something on the Mac, you can then edit on the... After that's transcribed on the Mac, it would save up to the cloud, and you could theoretically pull it up on your iPad to do the editing if you wanted to.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend having it open on both at the same time. But in theory, and obviously audio files can be pretty large, so that's something to bear in mind.
Yeah, I've noticed it's, this is a 3 gig. It's like, I gotta make sure that app does not also turn into a 400 gigabyte app for me. Yeah. And do the exports and whatnot. And a little bit easier to archive your transcripts into whatever backup system you have. Cause it's all contained just in that one file, right?
Yeah, it's just a single file that has all of the audio, all of the images for the chapters and all of that stuff, and the transcript itself. And if you do need to, you can export the audio, and that's literally just copying the audio files out of the document in case if you accidentally lost your podcast original for some reason, you would just be able to export the audio from the transcript.
Yeah. There's no fancy MP3 conversions and stuff, just the straight
audio
files.
It's literally just take the audio that's already inside the document and give you access to it again if you need it.
And has making a Mac version of Transcriptionist given you the bug to see what Ferrite would look like on the Mac?
I can't remember if we discussed this last time we talked, but I mean, I already know what Ferrite would look like on the Mac because I spent something like a year trying to make a Catalyst version of it work.
Yeah.
And in some ways it was very cool to see that there and see it with those Mac idioms, but there was a number of problems in Catalyst / macOS that I couldn't work around, primarily around things like plugins, and also just there was some weird stuff to do with scrolling and responsiveness on the Mac that wasn't. It was weird because you've got this really powerful Mac, and it wasn't as smooth as a several years old iPad or iPhone.
Right.
And there was no reason for that.
Yeah.
And so that's why it ended up effectively, I was like, the time that I'm spending on this is time that I'm not spending on the iOS version that people are already using. So I focused on Ferrite 3 and then this. Now, I have been thinking about maybe doing a fully native version. That does also bring up a whole bunch of other questions, like, again, the plugins thing, because plugins are different on the Mac versus the iPad. So that's going to cause problems if you have a podcast project on one that uses plugins that aren't available on the other. But maybe that's just life.
I mean, my if it was me, and you just did whatever I told you to do, it would be visionOS would be the next thing to do. You can do these control pads on the table in front of you, a big button for like cut and grab audio in front of you. Just make your own custom keyboard virtual in front of you, and this fully visionOS thing.
I've been thinking about visionOS. It's very cool looking. I have a question that I don't have an answer to, which is, can you select regions of audio using visionOS? Because my understanding, which may be incorrect, but my understanding is that for privacy reasons, apps don't know what you're looking at.
Oh, with eye tracking.
All of your selections, exactly.
Yeah.
All of your selections are based on what you look at. And the way that they sort of cut the Gordian knot on the privacy thing there is that visionOS doesn't tell developers where you're looking at until you push a button, and then it says you pushed this button.
Right.
And visionOS handles making the button highlight when you look at it and press when you press it. And then the app just goes, oh, this has been pressed, I need to respond to that. Now that's fine for pushing buttons.
Right.
It's also fine for shortening or lengthening the edges of audio, because you look at the edge that you want to edit. And
or
pinch.
Cutting at the playhead would also have.
Yes, but not
point.
Anywhere else. And also, how do you? It's tricky to move the playhead because you have to. It's not impossible, but it might be really awkward if you always have to cut at the playhead. You can't just go slice.
Yeah, and the app needs to work without a keyboard or trackpad, even though a lot of people will use that, but it needs a backup by default way to use it just with your hands.
And I'm just not sure what the story is on visionOS. And again, it might all work, but we don't know because we haven't seen it.
Right.
Our audio plugins supported on visionOS. What about things like recording? I don't think
that's my big question with that. I don't know. I don't know the recording side of things. My dream is that battery box, that USB-C port is also used for I/O, but I don't think that's been shared as a thing. But yeah,
I mean, it might be, but that might also be wishful thinking.
Yes, I'd say wishful
Apple
thinking.
Can sometimes be quite
Gen 3 or 4 maybe that gets added. Yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, we'll see how the iPad versions of apps run. But yeah, I would definitely love a visionOS app. The custom keyboard shortcuts in Ferrite are so good. It'd be cool to be able to use that kind of stuff to make your own custom control surface in front of you, where you just make these different touch targets for different edits and things.
Yeah, I mean, although I don't know if that's actually going to be useful, because reaching out. So if you think about something like a Stream Deck, an actual physical Stream Deck, the great thing about that is that you can put your hands on it and feel the edges of the buttons and know which ones that your fingers are on. Look at it without looking at it and without accidentally trigger anything, because you actually have to push it.
Right.
That's not going to be the case with a visual one.
Right.
With a virtual reality one, which means that you're going to have to look down.
Yes.
It's like the MacBook Pro touch bar thing.
Yeah, I was saying Apple should make a huge touch bar for visionOS just in front of you there. Yeah, but there's no tactileness to what it is.
So, and the other thing is, if you're looking at it, it's anything that you look at can be a target anyway, because you don't have to reach out and tap things with your finger on visionOS. You just look at them and then just tap your fingers together wherever those fingers are, and it just triggers the thing you're looking at.
Yeah.
So at that point, something like the shortcuts bar that's already in Ferrite, that's as powerful as some kind of wacky control surface, because you just have to look at it.
Right. I mean, this really means you should sell a physical touchpad, touch control surface for Ferrite for visionOS that actually does nothing except for have different buttons that you could feel around, and then map things.
Again, we're back to the question of does visionOS support peripherals? And we don't know.
No. Yeah.
I suppose
Bluetooth accessories. I believe it would hook up with like a MIDI keyboard and stuff like that. I would hope so.
Maybe a MIDI keyboard. Obviously, a keyboard is supported. We know that. Yeah. So if somebody made a device that was essentially a keyboard and it was just triggering keyboard shortcuts when you pushed the hardware buttons, that should work.
Right. Yeah. But anyways, I could talk about that stuff for hours. Very, very curious how that platform evolves over the years and launches and everything. But anyways, I did think of one other cool use case of Transcriptionist. Back when I was trying to learn Japanese, I would listen to the Monster Hunter podcast from Japan just because I wanted to hear people speak it in a podcast form. And now I could go back and, throw those episodes through it and see what they were actually saying and very quickly speaking Japanese. That could be fun to do. Because then you could run the transcript through a translator app as well.
Yeah, potentially.
Anything else we haven't covered about the app that you'd like to before we wrap it up?
I am trying to remember. We've covered quite a lot, so I'm not sure. I'm just literally opening it up and having a look to see if there's anything.
We should mention it is free to download, and you can use the tiny brain totally for free. And
it's got a limited amount of duration, though.
But that'll give you a good sense of the UI and see if this is kind of a tool that will fit your needs.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else that's coming to mind offhand.
Yeah, I think we went it through every nook and cranny of it. And I'm so glad this app exists. This is an app I've wanted to exist for a while. It's awesome that this AI revolution we're now in was able to help you give birth to this new app. It's awesome.
It is cool. I like it because it's a constructive use of AI.
Yes.
If you see what I mean.
Yes. This is I was going to say this is an app that will not steal your job, but if you are a professional transcriber, this will aid you in allowing you to do even more transcriptions. And yeah.
Indeed.
Yes. So where can people find more information about this awesome new app?
So, that's going to be on woojijuice.com. That's WOOJI dash and then juice as in fruit juice.com. Right as we speak, which is about a week before the Apple event, it's still just a coming soon page for that. But by the time this airs, I'm sure that will have all of the details, lots of pictures on all platforms, and links to the App Store and all of the rest of it. You can also find us on Mastodon as @Wooji I think it's indieapps.space.
Yes.
I believe.
I'll make sure it's linked to in the description here for the podcast, the show notes. Cool. And then we must say, if you are a Ferrite user, make sure to update the latest version of Ferrite when you're using Transcript to have that nice direct integration there.
Yeah, I'm hoping to. I think Apple now have a thing where you can upload app updates for multiple apps and submit them at the same time, and then they all either go through or don't.
Oh, nice!
So that we don't end up with a situation where you've got one there without the support from the other. So yeah. Again, this is, we're still in the final preparation stages. We're waiting for the final Xcode for iOS 17 and all of that to come down. And then it has to go through App Store review and all of that. But hopefully within the next couple of weeks, as we talk, which I think from what you were saying is going to be a week or two before this episode goes out. So it should hopefully all be out and available by the time you hear this.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Canis, for your time. It's been a great chat. I always enjoyed these deep dives into what you're up to with your Your apps.
Thank you, Tim. It's been great to chat.
Well, that's my discussion with Canis all about Transcriptionist. Make sure to check out Transcriptionist over at www.wooji-juice.com. And my thanks to Canis for his time recording this episode, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. As a reminder, you can support the show by trying out Agenda. Learn more at www.agenda.com. And my thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Get early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros by subscribing at patreon.com/iPad Pros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.